The crowbar crashes through the windshield of Officer Martinez's patrol car as Karen screams, "Maybe this will teach you respect." She doesn't see the dashcam recording her every move, or the federal agent watching from across the street, or the unmarked van pulling up behind her. In 15 seconds, Karen's lesson will become the most expensive mistake of her life, because that wasn't just any cop car she decided to destroy. The afternoon sun blazed mercilessly over the Riverside Shopping Center parking lot as Karen Whitmore slammed her Mercedes door with enough force to rattle the windows. Her perfectly manicured nails drummed against her designer purse as she stalked toward the police cruiser parked in the handicapped space, the same space she'd been trying to claim for the past 10 minutes. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You can't park there." Officer Miguel Martinez looked up from his incident report, his weathered face showing the patience of someone who'd dealt with entitled citizens for 15 years. A 42-year-old veteran cop had been finishing paperwork from a domestic disturbance call when the luxury sedan had circled the lot like a vulture. "Ma'am, I'm responding to a call. I'll be done in a few minutes." Karen's face flushed crimson beneath her expertly applied makeup. "I don't care what you're doing. I have a hair appointment, and I need that space. My tax dollars pay your salary." Martinez sighed, recognizing the type immediately. Riverside was full of them wealthy residents who believed their zip code granted them special privileges. "Ma'am, this is an official police matter. Please find another space." "Don't you ma'am me." Karen's voice rose to a shriek that echoed off the surrounding cars. "I am Karen Whitmore. My husband sits on the city council, and you will move this car right now." Other shoppers began to slow their pace, some pulling out phones. Martinez felt the familiar weight of being watched, judged, recorded. In today's climate, every interaction was a potential career ender. "Mrs. Whitmore, I understand your frustration, but no, you don't understand anything." Karen stepped closer to the patrol car, her expensive heels clicking against the asphalt. "You people think you can do whatever you want, but I'm going to teach you a lesson about respect." Martinez's hand instinctively moved toward his radio. 20 feet away, a man in a gray suit leaned against a black SUV, speaking quietly into a phone while watching the confrontation unfold. His trained eyes missed nothing, not Karen's escalating aggression, not the growing crowd of onlookers, and certainly not the way Martinez maintained his professional composure despite the provocation. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step back." "Step back?" Barron's voice cracked with rage. "I'll show you." "Step back." She spun on her heel and marched to her Mercedes, her movements sharp and purposeful. Martinez watched in growing alarm as she popped the trunk and emerged with a tire iron, its chrome surface gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Mrs. Whitmore, put that down immediately." Martinez stepped out of his cruiser, one hand on his holster, the other reaching for his radio. "You're about to commit a felony. The only felony here is your attitude." Karen raised the tire iron above her head like a war club. "Maybe some property damage will teach you to show proper respect to taxpayers." The first blow shattered the passenger side window, sending a cascade of safety glass across the parking lot. Screams erupted from the growing crowd as phones captured every moment. Martinez keyed his radio with practiced efficiency. "Unit 23 to dispatch. I need backup at Riverside Shopping Center. I have a subject destroying city property with a weapon." Karen didn't hear him. She was lost in a red haze of entitled fury, bringing the tire iron down again and again. The windshield spiderwebbed, then collapsed inward. The hood buckled under her assault. Paint flew in metallic flakes as she carved deep gouges into the doors. "This is what happens when you disrespect me," she screamed between blows. "This is what happens when you think you can treat people like garbage." Martinez drew his weapon but kept it lowered, his training warring with the surreal nature of the situation. He'd been threatened by gang members, chased by drunk drivers, and fought with domestic abusers. But he'd never watched a city councilman's wife systematically destroy his patrol car with gardening tools. "Put the weapon down now, Mrs. Whitmore." Last warning. Karen whirled to face him, the tire iron dripping with flecks of blue and white paint. Her carefully styled hair had come loose, framing her flushed face like a madwoman's halo. "What are you going to do? Shoot me?" "Shoot a taxpayer for standing up for her rights." The man in the gray suit had moved closer, his phone call apparently finished. He stood near the growing crowd of onlookers, but something about his positioning suggested he wasn't just another curious shopper. His eyes tracked every movement, every angle, cataloging details with professional interest. "You have the right to remain silent," Martinez began, but Karen cut him off with another devastating blow to his cruiser's roof. "I know my rights. I know them better than you ever will." The tire iron left a dent the size of a basketball, and I know that this piece of junk car means more to you than actual justice. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Karen seemed energized by the sound, her attacks becoming more frenzied. She kicked in the headlights, shattered the taillights, and used the tire iron to pry off the light bar with surprising strength. "Mrs. Whitmore, backup is 30 seconds out. If you surrender now, surrender." Karen laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "I'm not surrendering anything. I'm teaching you a lesson about accountability." She raised the tire iron for another blow, but froze as 3 more patrol cars screamed into the parking lot. There, red and blue lights painting the scene in alternating colors of urgency. The cavalry had arrived, but Karen seemed undaunted. "Let them come," she shouted, gesturing wildly with her makeshift weapon. "Let them all see how their police force treats law-abiding citizens." Officer Sarah Chen emerged from the first backup unit, her hand resting on her taser. Behind her, Officers Rodriguez and Thompson spread out to create a perimeter, their movements coordinated and professional. "Ma'am, drop the weapon and get on the ground." Chen's voice carried the authority of someone who'd talked down armed suspects. Before Karen's response was to smash out the remaining intact window, sending more glass showering across the asphalt. "I'm not dropping anything. I'm proving a point." The man in the gray suit had disappeared, but his black SUV remained in the parking lot. Through its tinted windows, more figures could be seen speaking into phones, their attention focused entirely on the unfolding drama. Martinez holstered his weapon as his backup took control of the scene. The situation had escalated beyond a simple parking dispute into something that would make headlines and destroy careers. Karen Whitmore had just committed multiple felonies in front of dozens of witnesses, all while being recorded from every possible angle. "Final warning, Mrs. Whitmore." Chen had her taser drawn now, the red laser dot dancing across Karen's designer blouse. "Drop the weapon or you will be tased." Karen turned to face the semicircle of officers, the destroyed patrol car behind her like a monument to her rage. Her chest heaved with exertion and adrenaline, but her grip on the tire iron remained firm. "You want to tase me? Go ahead. Show everyone what your protect and serve really means when someone stands up to you." She raised the tire iron one final time, targeting the cruiser's remaining intact surface, roof-mounted camera system, the device that had been silently recording every moment of her rampage, every word of her threats, every second of evidence that would seal her fate. But as the tire iron descended toward the camera, Karen's eyes finally focused on something that made her freeze mid-swing. The small, unobtrusive federal license plate mounted on the front bumper of the black SUV, and the letters D stenciled in small official script along its side. The tire iron slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the asphalt with a sound like a judge's gavel falling. Because Karen Whitmore had just destroyed a police vehicle that wasn't just any patrol car, it was the personal cruiser of Officer Miguel Martinez, who wasn't just any cop. He was an undercover federal liaison assigned to a Joint D task force investigating money laundering operations in Riverside's most exclusive neighborhoods. And the man in the gray suit stepping out of the SUV with a badge in his hand wasn't just any federal agent. He was Special Agent David Park, who'd been conducting surveillance on a particular city councilman suspected of washing cartel money through municipal contracts. Special Agent David Park's badge caught the afternoon light as he approached the destruction zone that had once been Officer Martinez's patrol car. His steps were measured, deliberate, the walk of a man who'd just watched a key piece of his investigation implode in the most spectacular way possible. "Mrs. Whitmore." Park's voice carried the weight of federal authority as he stopped 10 feet from where Karen stood frozen, the tire iron at her feet like evidence of her own downfall. "I'm Special Agent Park D. You're under arrest for destruction of federal property." Karen's face went white beneath her makeup. "Federal property? That's impossible. It's just a city police car. Officer Martinez is assigned to Joint Task Force Riverside." Park interrupted, producing handcuffs from his jacket. "That makes his vehicle federal property. Congratulations, Mrs. Whitmore. You've just committed a federal crime on camera." The parking lot had transformed into a circus of flashing lights and gathering crowds. Local news vans were already pulling up, their satellite dishes extending like mechanical flowers reaching for the sky. Karen's lesson was about to become evening news, entertainment for the entire metropolitan area. Martinez watched from beside his destroyed cruiser, his face a mask of professional composure hiding his racing thoughts. 3 years of careful undercover work, months of building trust with corrupt city officials, and now his cover was blown because a councilman's wife had decided to have a public meltdown. "You can't arrest me." Karen's voice cracked with panic. "My husband, your husband, is exactly why you're in handcuffs right now," Park said, securing the restraints with practiced efficiency. "Robert Whitmore has been under federal investigation for 18 months. Money laundering, racketeering, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances." The words hit Karen like physical blows. She staggered, her expensive heels struggling to find purchase on the glass-littered asphalt. That's impossible. Robert runs a construction company. He builds schools and hospitals. He builds them with cartel money," Park continued, relentlessly. "And now his wife has just given us the perfect excuse to tear apart your lives looking for evidence." Officer Chen had lowered her taser but remained alert as Park took custody of the prisoner. The crowd of onlookers pressed closer, phones capturing every moment of Karen's transformation from entitled citizen to federal suspect. "I want a lawyer," Karen whispered, the fight draining from her voice like air from a punctured tire. "Smart choice," Park replied. "You're going to need a good one." Across the parking lot, a black Lincoln Town car pulled up to the scene's perimeter. The man who emerged looked like he'd stepped from the pages of a political magazine. Silver hair, perfectly styled, expensive suit tailored to hide his growing paunch, and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to having his phone calls returned. Robert Whitmore had arrived. Martinez felt his stomach drop as he watched his primary surveillance target stride toward the cluster of police vehicles. 18 months of careful observation, documented meetings, and recorded conversations were about to become worthless if Robert realized he was under federal investigation. What the hell is going on here? Robert's voice carried across the parking lot with the authority of someone used to being the most important person in any room. Why is my wife in handcuffs? Park turned to face the approaching city councilman, his expression neutral. Mr. Whitmore, your wife just destroyed federal property. She's being charged with multiple felonies. Robert's eyes swept over the demolished patrol car, taking in the shattered windows, the dented hood, the scattered glass and metal debris. His political instincts were already calculating damage control, spin strategies, and whose fault this could become. This is clearly a misunderstanding, Robert said, his voice shifting into the smooth cadence of a practiced politician. My wife was obviously having some kind of medical episode. She needs treatment, not arrest. Your wife was having an episode. All right. Martinez spoke for the first time since the federal agents had taken over. An episode of entitlement and rage. All because I wouldn't move my car from a handicapped space. Robert's eyes focused on Martinez for the first time, and the undercover officer felt a chill run down his spine. Recognition flickered across the councilman's face, not full recognition, but the nagging sense of familiarity that came from seeing someone in an unexpected context. Do I know you, officer, ... Martinez, he replied, keeping his voice steady. We've never met. But that wasn't entirely true. Martinez had been watching Robert Whitmore for 18 months, following him to meetings with construction contractors who weren't in the construction business, documenting his visits to warehouses that never seemed to store anything legitimate, and recording his phone conversations with men who spoke in code about materials and deliveries. Robert studied Martinez's face with the intensity of a man whose survival depended on remembering details. In his line of work, both legal and illegal faces were currency, and this particular face was setting off alarm bells he couldn't quite identify. Robert, please. Karen's voice was a whisper of desperation. Just get me out of here. Make this go away. I'm trying. Sweetheart, Robert replied, but his attention remained fixed on Martinez. It's just ... There's something familiar about this situation. Agent Park stepped between them, his intervention smooth and purposeful. Mr. Whitmore, your wife is being transported to federal holding. If you want to help her, I suggest you contact an attorney who specializes in federal crimes. Federal crimes. Robert's voice rose an octave, over a damaged police car. This is harassment, destruction of federal property, assault with a deadly weapon, terroristic threats, and disturbing the peace. Park enumerated with clinical precision. And that's just what we witnessed in the last 30 minutes. The news crews had arrived in force now, their cameras capturing every moment of the Whitmore family's public humiliation. Karen's designer outfit was wrinkled and stained, her perfectly styled hair a mess of loose strands and scattered glass. She looked like what she was, a woman whose privileged world had just collapsed around her. Robert's phone buzzed incessantly in his pocket. Reporters, political allies, and damage control specialists all demanding answers he didn't have. But his attention remained laser-focused on Martinez. That familiar face that represented a threat he couldn't quite identify. I know you, Robert said suddenly, his voice cutting through the chaos of sirens and shouting reporters. I've seen you before? Martinez felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the afternoon heat. I don't think so, sir. I patrol a different district. No, not in uniform. Robert's eyes narrowed with concentration. Somewhere else. Recently, the pieces were clicking together in Robert's mind like tumblers in a lock. The face he'd glimpsed in his rearview mirror during that meeting at the industrial complex last month. The man in civilian clothes who'd been sitting in the coffee shop when he'd met with Eduardo's courier. The jogger who'd been running past his house with suspicious frequency. You're not just a patrol cop, Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You're watching me? The parking lot seemed to freeze around them. Agent Park's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, while Officers Chen and Rodriguez shifted their positions to maintain clear lines of sight. The crowd of onlookers sensed the sudden tension, phones recording what might become the climactic moment of the entire incident. Martinez met Robert's gaze steadily, knowing that his cover was blown but determined not to give the man any more information than necessary. I'm just a police officer doing my job, Mr. Whitmore. Bullshit, Robert snarled, his political facade cracking to reveal the street-smart survivor underneath. You've been watching me for months, following me, recording me, building some kind of case. Karen looked between her husband and the police officer, her drug-addled brain struggling to process the implications. What are you talking about, Robert? What case? Robert's mind was racing now, calculating exposures and vulnerabilities. If Martinez was undercover federal, then how much did they know? How long had they been watching? And most importantly, how much evidence had they gathered? How long? Robert demanded, stepping closer to Martinez despite the weapons trained in his direction. How long have you been spying on me? Agent Park moved to intervene, but Martinez raised a hand to stop him. The game was over anyway, might as well play the final hand with some dignity. Long enough, Martinez said quietly, long enough to know exactly what you've been doing, who you've been meeting with, and where the money comes from. The admission hit Robert like a physical blow. His carefully constructed world of legitimate business and political respectability was crumbling, and it was all because his wife couldn't handle being told no by a parking enforcement officer. You son of a bitch, Robert whispered, his hands clenching into fists. You've been playing me this whole time. Actually, Agent Park interjected smoothly, Officer Martinez has been doing his job, and thanks to your wife's little tantrum, we now have probable cause to execute every search warrant we've been preparing for the last 6 months. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Robert's face went ashen as the full implications hit him. Karen's destruction of the police car hadn't just been a crime, it had been the key that unlocked every door the Fed. The helicopters appeared on the horizon like mechanical vultures, their rotors cutting through the afternoon air with the precision of an approaching storm. Robert Whitmore watched them grow larger, his political instincts screaming that this was no coincidence. This was a coordinated federal operation that had been months in the planning. You orchestrated this, he accused, whirling to face Agent Park. The parking space? The confrontation you set my wife up? Park's expression remained neutral, but Martinez caught the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Your wife chose to destroy federal property, Mr. Whitmore. We didn't make her pick up that tire iron. The first helicopter touched down in the shopping center's outer lot, its downdraft scattering debris and sending the crowd of onlookers scrambling for cover. Men in tactical gear emerged before the skids fully settled, their movements coordinated with the efficiency of a military operation. Karen watched the deployment with growing horror, her handcuffed hands trembling against the patrol car where Agent Park had positioned her. Robert, what did you do? What did you get us into? But Robert wasn't listening to his wife anymore. His attention was fixed on the lead helicopter, where a familiar figure was stepping onto the tarmac. U.S. Attorney Elizabeth Morrison, the federal prosecutor who'd made her career destroying organized crime families and corrupt politicians. Her presence meant this wasn't just an investigation anymore. This was an execution. Jesus Christ, Robert whispered, recognizing the woman whose picture he'd seen on the front page of every newspaper in the state. They're bringing in the heavyweights. Morrison approached with the confident stride of someone who'd never lost a case she cared about winning. Her gray suit was immaculate despite the helicopter ride, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look like an avenging angel in business attire. Agent Park, she called out over the dying rotor wash. I trust Mrs. Whitmore's performance was everything we hoped for. The words hit Robert like a sledgehammer. Performance? You mean you knew this would happen? Morrison's smile was arctic. Mr. Whitmore, we've been monitoring your wife's, shall we say, behavioral patterns for quite some time. 18 incidents of public disturbance in the last 2 years, all involving her belief that rules don't apply to her family. It was only a matter of time before she provided us with the probable cause we needed. Karen's legs gave out, and she slumped against the destroyed patrol car, the full weight of her manipulation finally sinking in. You used me. You knew I'd lose my temper. You lost your temper because you're an entitled narcissist who thinks wealth buys immunity, Morrison replied without a trace of sympathy. We simply provided the opportunity for you to demonstrate that character flaw in a legally useful way. The tactical teams had spread throughout the parking lot now, establishing a perimeter that kept the growing media circus at bay while federal agents coordinated the next phase of their operation. Martinez watched it all unfold with professional admiration and personal dread. This was exactly the kind of high-profile takedown that ended careers and made headlines. Robert's phone buzzed with another incoming call, but he ignored it. His political allies would be distancing themselves now. His business partners would be lawyering up, and his carefully constructed network of corruption would be scrambling to cut ties before the federal government could trace the connections. The search warrants, he said, his voice hollow with defeat. You already have them. Morrison produced a thick folder from her briefcase, its contents representing months of investigative work and legal preparation. Your home, your office, your construction sites, your bank accounts, and every property you've touched in the last 5 years. Judge Harrison signed them this morning. This morning. Robert's voice cracked. Before Karen, before your wife, committed multiple federal felonies. Yes, Morrison confirmed. We were going to execute them next week, but Mrs. Whitmore's little tantrum moved up our timeline considerably. The second helicopter was landing now, disgorging more federal agents and evidence technicians. Their equipment, cases, and crime scene gear suggested they were prepared for an extensive and thorough investigation that would leave no stone unturned. Martinez felt his phone vibrate with a text message. His D-handler was already coordinating witness protection protocols, safe house arrangements, and testimony schedules. 18 months of undercover work was about to become the cornerstone of a federal prosecution that would make national news. Robert Caron's voice was barely audible over the mechanical noise surrounding them. "I'm sorry. I didn't know." "You never know," Robert exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. "You never think about consequences. You just do whatever you want and expect me to clean up the mess." "Sir," Officer Chen interrupted, her voice professionally neutral, "you need to step back." But Robert was beyond hearing warnings now. The weight of his collapsing empire, his wife's stupidity, and his own impending imprisonment had pushed him past the breaking point. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What you've destroyed?" He lunged toward Caron, his hands reaching for her throat, but Martinez intercepted him with a tackle that sent both men sprawling across the glass-littered asphalt. The crowd gasped and phones captured every moment as the city councilman fought, like a wild animal against the undercover cop who'd been documenting his crimes for over a year. "Get off me," Robert screamed, throwing wild punches that mostly missed their target. "You son of a bitch, you destroyed my life." Martinez absorbed the blows with professional detachment, using his training to control the larger man without causing unnecessary injury around them. Tactical officers moved in to assist, but the federal prosecutor held up a hand to stop them. "Let them finish," Morrison said calmly. "Assault on a federal officer will make a nice addition to the charges." Robert managed to land one solid punch before Martinez pinned him completely, the blow splitting the undercover cop's lip and sending blood spattering across the asphalt. But the brief moment of violence had cost him everything. Assault on a federal officer would add years to his sentence and eliminate any possibility of a plea bargain. "Robert Whitmore," Morrison announced as tactical officers secured the struggling councilman. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, money laundering, racketeering, and now assault on a federal officer." The reading of his rights was drowned out by the approaching wail of ambulances, the mechanical thunder of more helicopters, and the chaotic shouting of reporters who'd realized they were witnessing the biggest political scandal in the cities. History. Caron watched her husband being dragged away in handcuffs, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, his political career obliterated by his own hands. The tire iron lay forgotten in the debris of the destroyed patrol car, the weapon that had started a chain reaction of destruction neither of them could have imagined. "Mrs. Whitmore," Agent Park said gently, "it's time to go." As they led her toward the federal transport vehicle, Caron caught sight of her reflection in the shattered remains of the patrol car's side mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, disheveled, desperate, and defeated. The entitled princess who demanded a parking space had vanished, replaced by a federal prisoner facing decades in prison. The helicopters continued their mechanical thunder overhead, their cameras capturing aerial footage that would lead every newscast for weeks. The Riverside Shopping Center had become ground zero for the biggest political corruption scandal in the state's history. And it had all started because Caron Whitmore couldn't accept the word no from a police officer. But as the federal convoy prepared to depart with their prisoners, none of them noticed the unmarked van parked at the far edge of the lot, its occupants speaking rapidly into encrypted radios. The men inside weren't federal agents or local police, they were cartel operatives who had been watching the Whitmores for months, waiting for exactly this kind of exposure. And now that Robert's federal protection was gone, and his network was compromised, those men had orders to ensure that certain secrets would never make it to a federal courtroom. The unmarked van's engine turned over with predatory silence as the federal convoy disappeared around the corner, taking Robert and Caron Whitmore toward their new reality of concrete cells and orange jumpsuits. Inside the van, 3 men spoke in rapid Spanish, their voices carrying the cold efficiency of professionals who'd cleaned up messes like this before. "Al contacto está comprometido," asked the driver, his scarred hands steady on the wheel despite the gravity of their situation. "Completamente," replied the passenger, lowering high-powered binoculars. "The federal prosecutor has everything. Bank records, meeting locations, delivery schedules." The third man, seated in the back with enough firepower to level a city block, checked his phone for encrypted messages from his superiors. The cartel had invested millions in Robert Whitmore's construction empire, using his municipal contracts to wash drug money through legitimate channels. Now that investment was not only lost, it was evidence in a federal case that could bring down their entire West Coast operation. "New orders," he announced, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "Eliminate all connections. No witnesses, no loose ends." Martinez was still giving his statement to federal investigators when his handler's urgent text message made his blood run cold. "Safe house compromised. You're blown. Run." He looked up from his phone to find Agent Park watching him with concern. "Problem, Officer Martinez. We need to leave now." Martinez's training kicked in as he scanned the parking lot, noting exit routes and potential threats. The media circus was still in full swing, but something felt wrong to many unfamiliar faces in the crowd, too many people who weren't taking pictures or asking questions. Park followed his gaze and immediately understood. How many unknown buts? If they're here, my cover isn't the only thing that's blown. Martinez was already moving toward his backup vehicle, every instinct screaming danger. They'll go after anyone connected to the case. The realization hit. Park like ice water. Morrison, she's still coordinating the search warrants. U.S. Attorney Elizabeth Morrison was 3 miles away at Robert Whitmore's construction headquarters, supervising the systematic dismantling of his business empire. Federal agents swarmed through offices and warehouses, seizing computers, financial records, and anything else that might contain evidence of cartel money laundering. She stood in Robert's executive office, surveying boxes of evidence that represented months of investigative work and millions of taxpayer dollars. The prosecution was going to be a masterpiece, a textbook example of how federal law enforcement could dismantle organized crime through patience and precision. Her satisfaction was interrupted by the buzz of her secure phone. "Morrison, ma'am, this is Agent Park. You need to evacuate that location immediately. We have reason to believe hostile forces are moving to eliminate witnesses." Morrison looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the busy street below, noting nothing unusual in the afternoon traffic. "Agent Park, I have 20 federal agents providing security, unless you're expecting a military assault." The windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and gunfire. Morrison dove behind Robert's mahogany desk as automatic weapons. Fire shredded the office around her. Federal agents throughout the building returned fire, their tactical training kicking in as they tried to establish defensive positions against an enemy that had clearly been planning this assault for weeks. "All units, we are under attack," Morrison shouted into her radio as bullets splintered the desk above her head. "I repeat, federal building under attack." 3 blocks away, Martinez and Park heard the distant rattle of gunfire and knew they were too late. The cartel's cleanup operation had begun, and the federal prosecutor who could have brought down their entire network was pinned in a kill zone, with 20 agents against an unknown number of professional killers. "We have to get to her," Martinez said, checking his weapon as they raced through the city streets. "Negative," Park replied, his voice tight with professional restraint. "We stick to extraction protocol." Morrison knew the risks, but Martinez was already out of the car, disappearing into the maze of downtown buildings with the fluid grace of someone who'd spent months learning every alley and rooftop in the area. His 18 months of surveillance had given him intimate knowledge of the terrain, knowledge that might be the only thing standing between Morrison and execution. Back at the construction headquarters, Morrison tried to coordinate her agents' defense while trapped behind increasingly inadequate cover. The attackers had planned this assault with military precision, using explosives to breach the building's defenses and positioning snipers to control the surrounding streets. "Status report," she demanded over the radio. "We've got at least 12 shooters, professional-grade equipment," came the reply from Agent Torres, her voice strained with combat stress. "They're not trying to escape, they're trying to eliminate everyone in the building." Morrison understood the implications immediately. This wasn't a rescue operation or a diversionary tactic. This was an execution squad with orders to leave no witnesses alive, no matter the cost and ammunition or exposure. Her phone buzzed with another message, this one from an unknown number. "Walk out the front door with your hands up. You have 30 seconds before we bring down the building." She looked at the message with the cold calculation of someone who'd prosecuted cartel cases for 20 years. They were offering her a choice between immediate execution and being buried alive heartily, the kind of negotiation that inspired confidence. "All agents," she said into her radio, "prepare for final defensive positions. They're going to try to collapse the building." The words had barely left her lips when the first explosion rocked the foundation, sending clouds of dust and debris cascading through the office. Emergency lights flickered on as the main power failed, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made the scene look like something from a war zone. Martinez reached the building's back entrance just as the second explosion shattered the loading dock. He could hear the systematic demolition taking place inside, shaped charges, placed with professional precision to bring down the structure in a controlled collapse that would eliminate all evidence along with all witnesses. His radio crackled, with Agent Park's voice, "Martinez, get out of there. Building's coming down." But Martinez was already inside, moving through smoke-filled corridors toward the sound of gunfire. His years of undercover work had taught him to read situations quickly, and this one was clear. Morrison and her team had maybe 5 minutes. Before the building became their tomb, he found her on the 3rd floor, still coordinating her agent's defense despite the blood running down her face from flying glass. Around her, federal agents maintained disciplined fire against attackers who seemed more interested in keeping them pinned than actually killing them. "They're stalling," Martinez realized, grabbing Morrison's arm. "The explosions aren't random, they're hurting us toward the center of the building." Morrison's prosecutorial mind immediately grasped the strategy: controlled demolition. They want to make it look like structural failure, not assassination. The 3rd explosion was much closer, sending both of them sprawling as part of the ceiling collapsed. Through the growing hole, Martinez could see the late afternoon sky and realized they had one chance, a dangerous, desperate chance that would require perfect timing and considerable luck. "Can you climb?" he asked Morrison, who was already struggling to her feet despite obvious injuries. "I can do whatever it takes to put these bastards in prison." She replied with the fierce determination that had made her legendary in federal courts. S. Martinez helped her toward the gaping hole in the ceiling. Neither of them saw the figure watching from the building across the street, Karen Whitmore, who had somehow escaped federal custody, and was now witnessing the violent conclusion of her husband's criminal empire. The same empire that her tantrum in a shopping center parking lot had exposed, and which was now trying to bury its secrets under tons of concrete and steel. Oh, Karen was no longer the entitled princess who demanded a parking space. Federal custody had a way of clarifying priorities, and watching assassins try to murder the prosecutor who could have sent her to prison for life had given her a new perspective on justice, consequences, and the true cost of her family's choices. She pulled out her phone and began recording, determined that if she was going to prison, she was taking everyone responsible with her, including the men who thought they could solve their problems with explosives and automatic weapons. The final lesson was about to be taught, and this time Karen Whitmore was going to be the teacher.